with Lesson 10 of the Special Operations Candidate course. As you probably know by now, my name is Matt, so I'm going to skip that introduction every time from now on. And this time we're going to be talking about no-shows. And no-shows are a type of attrition. If we haven't talked about the word attrition yet, when we say attrition, we're talking about reasons why candidates don't successfully complete their pipeline 100% and get to the career that they're interested in. And so no-shows are one form of attrition, and we're going to talk about them first, mostly arbitrarily, but also because no-shows tend to be the first thing chronologically that actually happens, the first way that there can be a failure to complete pipeline. And you'll see what I'm talking about in just a second. So when we talk about no-shows, there's three general parts of the process here of getting to the career. You have the initial acceptance of orders to the career, if there are orders given as in form of a contract for the military, if you're going into that with the goal of going to these special operations programs, or a contract with another agency with the goal of going to a special operations program. That's when I say you've accepted orders to something. Or you've accepted or made the initial decision to actually go into the pipeline and started to take steps as far as what type of actions you have to take in order to get there. Okay? The second part is pipeline itself. Pipeline is the process you're going to have to go through in order to get to the third step, which is the career that you're interested in. So this is the ultimate goal. And of course, being interested in the ultimate goal, you're going to have to get from here through this series of tests and trials, which is called pipeline, and you're going to have to make it over to here. So how do people fail to show up for pipeline? Well, there's two different ways primarily. We're going to talk about one really quickly, and that's administrative no-shows. And when I say administrative no-shows, what I mean, mostly this happens in military communities or a community where you have a contractual obligation to fulfill. So you're going to be in that career for a while, but you're bored with the career, and that career has the opportunity for you to join a special operations group to get away from where you're at now. In other words, to have a totally different job, but still inside the same broad career. So this happens, like I said, with military very often because that's most likely the scenario that it's going to be in. But somebody's bored with their job. Let's say they are it doesn't matter what service they're in. It could be regular Army, regular Navy, whatever. They're bored with their job, and the Army or the Navy or the other services has options for you to go to special operations training in various capacities. And if you fulfill the initial maybe interview or entry requirements, initial physical requirements, you might get orders to go there. Okay, so they believe that you are genuinely interested in going to pipeline. But all you're interested in doing is getting away from point A where you are now. So you accept orders to go to pipeline, okay, with the expectation that once you accept orders, you're going to go here, but you really have no desire to actually go here at any point. And you never wanted to go through this. You just wanted to get these orders and get away from point A. That's administrative no-shows. It does come up in the statistics for no-shows and attrition, but we don't really care about it because this is not a real type of attrition. This person did not intend to complete this pipeline, and for that reason I don't care to include them when we talk about how to complete pipeline. So let's forget about that administrative no-show now that we mentioned it, and we'll talk about the greater concern, which is psychological no-shows. And this is somebody who actually has the required motivation at this point to continue or make the initial decision and intends to go here. Okay? But before they get here, as we come in the door, day one of pipeline, or don't come in the door, so to speak, they lack the required motivation to get themselves there. So why would this happen? Well, there's a few different ways, so let's talk about them. First, we have a reevaluation of your ability as a candidate. Now, why would this happen? It might happen because you've made this initial decision. Maybe you haven't taken the entrance requirement exam yet or the physical exam yet, but you think that you've got that stuff in the bag. So maybe you exercise at the gym all the time, you think you're in great shape, you looked at the physical screening test requirements and you think you got it aced already. For that reason, you think you're good to go. So you decide to take orders to adhere or to make the arrangements to get yourself into pipeline, but somewhere between here and here, you have a change of heart. Maybe during this period of time, you have the actual screening exam, physical screening exam. and you fail the screening test, because this happens a lot, a proctor who's knowledgeable in the requirements of this pipeline is going to give you that test and make it not necessarily as difficult as possible, but as realistic as possible. So don't think that you're going to take a physical screening test the way that it's written in the manual that you should take it. I've personally seen many examples of that not happening. And what happens is your proctor or your mentor or your instructor will get you kind of in operational condition physically. So in other words, they're going to kind of give you a real-world version of the screening test. They're not going to let you come in completely fresh off the bench and perform to standards testing. What they're going to do is they're going to run you through a physical training session, and then kind of after you're worked up a little bit and a little bit worn out, then they're going to give you that screening test. And then what happens is it tends to double the amount of butt kicking that it gives out in terms of who feels good about the screening test and who passes it and who does not. So it's very possible that from this point to this point, failure of a screening test would cause you to reevaluate your ability in a negative way. This would affect your self-confidence going in here in a negative way, to where it would demotivate you or maybe think that it's above you or you're not quite ready for it yet. So that's option one. Option two is that you reevaluate the expectations that you have of this pipeline. So in other words, you thought this was going to be a piece of cake at first. Not exactly the same as reevaluating your ability, because in that case you realize it's not that easy, or you're not as good as you thought, physically, mentally, whatever the metric is that you're using to evaluate yourself. So in the first case, you realize you're not as good as you thought. In the second case, you realize this is harder than you thought. It could kind of go hand in hand. It's just a very slight difference. But mostly what we're talking about here when we realize this is harder is, let's say you go in with the idea that you're going to go into pipeline. You don't know a whole lot about it. You just know the general idea and that you want to do it, and that's great. And then all the naysayers come out of the woodwork. So you got to realize going into a special operations pipeline, which is notoriously difficult, is going to attract all sorts of people who want to tell you how hard it is to do it. If you don't know that by now, you're going to learn it really quick. So everybody who's going to give you opinions on stuff is mostly going to be in a negative bias towards you not completing it or how difficult it is. It's not going to be everybody telling you, oh, don't worry, you can handle it. They're just not going to do that. It's not really human nature to do that, and we'll talk about that later in psychology lessons. So what they're going to do is kind of drag you down, not intentionally, but it's just the way that psychology works. So the naysayers come out of the woodwork. They tell you all these evolutions that candidates notoriously fail in pipeline, and so that starts working on your head. And you're going to start thinking, hey, I might have increased expectations of what did I really get myself into? And this kind of thinking makes you wind up quitting before you walk in the door, because what you're really expecting is this point down here, which is a lot more difficult than the first day. So you don't even bother to come in the first day because you're kind of intimidated. And the more notoriously difficult the pipeline is, for example, some of the military special operations pipelines are notoriously difficult. The more notoriously difficult it is, the higher that intimidation factor is, and the lower your self-confidence tends to get when you start listening to naysayers and stuff like that. The third option is that you change the value of completing this training. So in order for this to happen, in order to get to your career, you have to go through the pipeline. That's the general rule, and that's the whole idea. So whether this is a training process or simply a screening process doesn't really matter. In order to get here, you have to go through this so that they know that the right people are getting to here, right? So the third option is that you could devalue this based on devaluing this. So this is pretty rare, but let's say that you had a totally romanticized view of this certain career and you thought it was the best thing to do and that you could handle it and you were good to go motivation-wise up to here. But all of a sudden you just learned something about that career or had a change of heart essentially about what that career means to you, and it's not as meaningful as it was when you first started. So getting to this career, maybe this is something you're going to reevaluate, maybe it's not something you really want to do. And if you start thinking this is not something you really want to do, you automatically devalue the training here, okay? So in terms of getting to this career, if it's not important to get here, it's not going to be important to pass this pipeline anymore. If that happens before you start, it's not going to be important to show up on day one, which makes you a no-show. So ability, expectations, and value. So essentially, if you reevaluate any of these in a more negative fashion before you start, to the point where it's enough to sway your decision, you don't show up for day one, you become a no-show. That's it for no-shows. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and visit the website. And the next lesson is going to be on attrition as well, but we're going to be talking about mental unpreparedness.